Jed had always figured he'd die the way he lived, quiet, dusty, and ignored by just about everybody except his mule. The ranch had gone quiet years ago. The cattle were sold, the barn leaned like an old drunk, and Jed's back creaked louder than the windmill on a cold night. He'd sit in his recliner and talk to himself more than he cared to admit. The mule got half the conversation, and the bottle of whiskey got the other half. At 73, he had no family left, no purpose, and about as much spark as a wet match. He often joked that his body was like his old tractor, needs oil before it'll start, rattles and shakes while it runs, and guaranteed to leak in the wrong places. Mornings were the worst. Every joint popped like bubble wrap, his dentures clicked, and his prostate insisted on hourly check-ins. The highlight of his week was whether his coffee went through him faster than the newspaper crossword. If this was living, he thought, death might be the only vacation left. Jed looked in the mirror once and muttered, "The only thing I mount these days is the recliner." He laughed at his own joke, then coughed so hard his false teeth nearly flew out. That was the kind of comedy his life had boiled down to, body gags and lonely punchlines. So when the sky lit up one evening with a shimmer brighter than any thunderstorm he'd ever seen, Jed thought it was just the whiskey doing its work. A silver ship, smooth as a raindrop and twice as shiny, lowered itself right onto his pasture. The cows were long gone, so the only witness was him and the mule, who didn't seem to care much beyond twitching its ears. The hatch opened, and out stepped 11 tall figures. Women, by the looks of them, though women might be generous. They were, well, curvy, if you could call chitin curves. Their bodies shimmered with faint colors like wool slicks, and their eyes glowed soft amber. Their faces weren't human but carried a kind of elegance, and they moved with the kind of grace you only saw in beauty pageants or expensive whiskey ads. Each wore a sash embroidered with strange symbols. Jed squinted. If this is the Grim Reaper, she sure brought a lot of friends. The tallest one stepped forward and spoke. The sound was a buzzing hum that rattled Jed's fillings, but then a translator device on her chest crackled to life. "We have come, for the chosen husband." Jed scratched his stubbled chin. "You mean husbandry? Like farming?" "I did plenty of that, though these days I can barely keep a cactus alive." The group gasped in unison, their mandibles clicking. They exchanged rapid, excited chatter before the leader declared, "Yes. He speaks of his experience with livestock. He is perfect." Jed chuckled nervously. "Well, I do know my way around cattle and horses." They clapped their slender hands, wings fluttering. To them, it sounded like he'd just boasted about his virility. The mule brayed, as if laughing at the cosmic misunderstanding. The leader stepped closer, towering over him. Her voice trembled with reverence. "Great husband, 11 widows stand before you, seeking to join your stable." Jed blinked. "Stable? Lady, I ain't got a stable anymore. Got termites in the roof, and the floorboards are shot." But they weren't listening. They bowed their heads, 11 alien widows revering a washed-up rancher who couldn't bend down without pulling something. For the first time in decades, someone, well, something, looked at him like he mattered. He adjusted his hat, suddenly aware of his whiskey breath. "Now, hold on. I ain't sure what kind of joke this is, but I'm not exactly the marrying type." The leader touched her sash. "You misunderstand. On our world, to be husband is the highest honor. You are not to wed one. You are to wed all." She spread her arms, presenting the 11 like prize mares at auction. Jed coughed into his sleeve, choking on the dust in his throat, or maybe on the sheer absurdity. "All at once. Lady, I'm from Texas, not Utah." The widows burst excitedly, mistaking his protest for enthusiasm. One whispered, "He is bold, unafraid of numbers." Another sighed, "His stamina must be legendary." Jed shook his head, muttering, "Hell, the only legendary thing about me is how fast I fall asleep after dinner." Still, their eyes gleamed with expectation. They pressed closer, surrounding him with perfume that smelled like rain on hot dirt, strange, but not unpleasant. He felt like a fly trapped in a kaleidoscope. The mule brayed again, mocking him. "Now wait," Jed said, holding up a trembling hand. "I think you've got the wrong fella. I'm just an old rancher with more bad knees than working parts. You want a husband? Try the internet. I hear folks are ordering them online now. The leader tilted her head, translator crackling. He jokes even at the threshold of destiny. Truly, a stallion of wit. Jed groaned. Lady, if I'm a stallion, then I'm the kind they put out to pasture years ago. The 11 clapped again, mistaking self-deprecation for poetic modesty. To them, he was a living legend, the man who sows seed, tames beasts, and speaks in riddles. To him, he was just a tired body with more rust than steel left. Yet, deep down, a flicker of something stirred. When was the last time anyone had looked at him like he was more than a worn-out relic? When was the last time someone, anyone, had wanted him, even if it was based on a giant misunderstanding? Jed tipped his hat back, smirk tugging at the corner of his cracked lips. Well, I suppose if you'll need some husbandry, I can at least show you how it's done. The widows erupted in cheers, their voices like buzzing choirs. The mule stomped a hoof, as if sealing the deal. Jed swallowed hard. He had no idea what he'd just agreed to. But for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about death. He was thinking about tomorrow. And about whether his heart, or anything else, was still up to the task. Jed figured the aliens would thank him politely, maybe ask for some tips about cows, then blast off and leave him to his whiskey. That would have been the same version of events. Instead, the 11 widows unrolled what looked like glowing scrolls mixed with clipboards and data pads, and suddenly he was knee-deep in paperwork thicker than a Texas tax code. The leader presented it like a sacred relic. This is your stud contract, she declared through the crackling translator. Jed squinted. Stud contract? I don't breed horses no more. The widow tapped the first page. You are husband. You will perform your duties according to quota schedule. Each widow requires rotation. Jed muttered, rotation? Lady, my knees can't even rotate without popping out. The aliens ignored him. They pointed to columns labeled performance logs, seed viability reports, and something ominous called mounting cycle compliance. He nearly choked when he saw a spot labeled preferred position documentation. Jed barked a laugh. What in the hell is this, alien rodeo paperwork? You want me to fill out a survey before I even know if the barn door opens? They bowed respectfully, mistaking sarcasm for solemnity. The husband is wise. He insists on thorough inspection before sowing. One widow pulled out a massive ceremonial stamp. It looked like a judge's gavel had fused with a branding iron. She smacked it down with a dramatic boom, and caught Jed square on the backside. He yelped, stumbling forward, and they all gasped in awe. The husband demonstrates readiness. Jed rubbed his sore rump, muttering, readiness, my ass. The leader pushed the contract closer. Here is your breeding quota. 11 sessions per cycle. No less, no exceptions. Galactic law is clear. Jed blinked. Lady, I can barely mow the lawn once a month, let alone that. They exchanged whispers, translator stuttering to keep up. He speaks of his incredible restraint. Such stamina that he limits himself to conserve strength. Another added, a true stallion, saving seed for maximum harvest. Jed groaned. If I'm a stallion, I'm the one limping in the back of the herd. Still, the paperwork piled higher. They handed him a tablet with digital sliders for frequency and intensity. The default setting was terrifying. Jed scrolled down and nearly spit his dentures when he saw emergency resupply potions. He muttered, all I need is some steak and whiskey. The widows nodded vigorously. Yes. Steak and whiskey, the legendary stimulants of Earth males. We shall provide endless supply. Jed scratched his head. Wait, you serious? The leader answered with pure reverence. The husband's words are binding law. From this moment, steak and whiskey shall be ceremonial performance enhancers. Jed grinned despite himself. Well, at least this job's got perks. But they weren't done. A smaller widow pulled out a device shaped like binoculars and aimed it at him. Lights flickered, scanning from boots to hat. The translator blared, Seed viability test in progress. Jed swatted at the air. Hey, don't point that thing at me. Last time I was tested, the doctor just asked me to pee in a cup. The aliens gasped, whispering again. Such simplicity. The human methods are direct and efficient. Truly, he is legendary. The stamp came down again, this time narrowly missing his toes. Jed snapped, you people trying to notarize me or tenderize me? They bowed lower. Husband jokes in ritual wordplay. His humor proves virility. Jed realized nothing he said could be taken literally. He muttered, shoot, I'm about as fertile as a salted field. They clapped with joy. So powerful, his seed is invisible. Jed covered his face with both hands. Lord help me, I've become the galaxy's punchline. But the more he protested, the deeper they sank into worship. They scribbled his every word like scripture. When he complained about his bad hip, they wrote, husband reveals sacred weakness, balance test of endurance. When he griped about his dentures, they wrote, husband conceals detachable fertility stones. When he coughed, they cheered, mighty stallion trumpet call. He looked at the towering stack of forms, the ceremonial contracts, the glowing stamps, and realized he was in way over his head. They weren't asking, they were demanding. This wasn't about love or even companionship. This was about turning him into a communal stud, the biological equivalent of a public utility. He slammed his hand down on the table. Listen here. I can't promise miracles. I'm just an old man who likes his whiskey, his chair, and his peace. If you expect me to plow 11 fields a night, you're barking up the wrong cactus. The leader placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Your modesty humbles us. The husband underestimates his own power. We shall help you rise to the challenge. Jed muttered, lady, I haven't risen to a challenge since Clinton was in office. They squealed with delight. He references historical performance. His timeline of virility is vast. He sighed. There was no escape. He was stuck in a galactic HR nightmare where every joke turned into gospel and every flaw became proof of divine stamina. And the worst part? He kind of liked the attention. For decades, nobody had looked at him twice. Now he was the center of the universe, with 11 alien widows begging to sign him into eternal duty. He chewed his lip, staring at the signature line. It glowed expectantly. The mule brayed outside, as if laughing at his predicament. Jed finally picked up the pen, muttering, well, hell. A man's gotta work for his steak somehow. And with a shaky hand, he signed. The widows erupted into a buzzing cheer. The leader lifted the contract high like a championship trophy. It is done. The husband is bound by law, by honor, by duty. Jed sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. He'd gone from forgotten rancher to galactic stud in one evening, and all it took was a little paperwork and a lot of bad translations. God help me, he whispered, I've been branded like cattle. Jed had thought signing the contract would slow things down, but it only opened the floodgates. The very next morning, the widows surrounded him like cheerleaders before a big game, presenting trays of strange fruits, glowing drinks, and powders that smelled like burnt cinnamon. They insisted it was conditioning fuel for his new duties. He told them all he needed was bacon and black coffee. They nodded as if he'd just invented a new holy ritual. By lunch, they'd slaughtered half the pantry trying to recreate bacon and brewed coffee so thick it looked like tar. Jed sipped, nearly gagged, and muttered, strong enough to float a horseshoe. They clapped wildly. The husband proclaims a blessing. Every human flaw became a marvel. When he fell asleep mid-conversation and started snoring like a chainsaw, they gasped and pressed their antennae to the floorboards. His thunder call awakens the soil, one whispered. When his dentures slipped out and landed in a glass of whiskey, the widows fell to their knees, calling them detachable fertility stones and demanding to know how he grew them. Jed tried to wave it off, but they built a shrine around the damn glass before dinner. Even his creaky knees got mythologized. The loud pop when he bent down to tie his boot sent them into raptures. The readiness signal. The husband declares his body primed. Jed shook his head. That was arthritis, not arousal. Didn't matter. They were already chanting in unison, primed. 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 Then came the training regimen. Apparently, no stallion could be expected to perform without proper conditioning. They marched him to the pasture, handed him weights shaped like alien gourds, and demanded push-ups. Jed managed 2 before collapsing face-first in the dirt. He grumbled, "I ain't built for lifting, unless it's a fork." The widow scribbled the phrase down, whispering about his philosophy of selective energy expenditure. By evening, they'd already turned it into a proverb: the husband lifts only what must be lifted. Things only got stranger when they introduced him to alien aphrodisiacs. Bright purple fruit that looked like a cross between a watermelon and a hand grenade. They insisted it would grant stamina beyond measure. Jed took a cautious bite, and within minutes, his ears started glowing like porch lights. He hiccuped, sparks flying out his mouth like a faulty spark plug. The widow swooned. The husband radiates within a fire. Jed was too busy trying not to choke to correct them. The side effects piled up. Alien teas made his hiccups sing in 3-part harmony. Powdered roots turned his skin patchy green for half a day. At one point, he burped and a glowing bubble floated out, hovering over the group before it popped. The widows cried with joy, convinced it was a fertility omen. Jed just muttered, "I knew that chili was too damn spicy." But the strangest part wasn't the rituals or the potions, it was how they twisted his laziness into legend. When Jed refused to wake at dawn, claiming, "A man's got no business plowing fields before coffee," the widows bowed reverently. By sundown, they'd etched it into stone tablets: the stallion rests before the furrows are broken. When he settled into his recliner and declared, "Nothing happens till I've had my nap," they gasped as if he'd spoken prophecy. The next morning, they lined up outside his door in total silence, waiting for him to wake before making a sound. Jed didn't know whether to laugh or panic. They were building a religion around his procrastination, his laziness, and his bodily malfunctions. And the kicker? He kind of enjoyed it. No one had ever treated him like more than an afterthought, yet here he was, worshipped for farting in his sleep. Still, the pressure mounted. The widows weren't just looking for philosophy, they expected performance. They practiced chants around him, waving banners painted with crude drawings of cattle, horses, and, disturbingly accurate, parts of human anatomy. They circled his recliner, chanting, "Stud! Stud! Stud," while he tried to eat chili. He snapped, "I'm eating beans, not breeding stock." They cheered louder, beans of virility. Beans of power. One night, they carried him, literally carried him, on a throne made of welded tractor parts, parading him around the ranch under the stars. They crowned him with a wreath of barbed wire and tinsel, declaring him the stallion of 2 worlds. Jed muttered under his breath, "More like jackass of 1. Of course, they didn't hear him right. Yes. Jackass, the sacred beast of endurance. Even his old mule wasn't safe. They decorated it with ribbons, insisting it was the sacred companion of the husband. Jed could swear the mule rolled its eyes at him. But the real comedy hit during the first trial. The widows explained he must undergo a demonstration of readiness before the clan's council could recognize his authority. He asked what that meant. They answered by rolling out a massive, mattress-sized slab covered in glowing silk. Jed stared. "You expect me to wrestle on that?" They nodded solemnly. "Yes. Wrestling proves vigor." So they all gathered around, chanting encouragement. Jed climbed up, joints popping, belly sagging, sweat already forming on his forehead. He gave a half-hearted flex, then immediately pulled a muscle in his back. He dropped to his knees, groaning. The widows erupted in awe. The husband shows mercy by kneeling. He conserves strength for the true harvest. Jed gasped, trying to catch his breath. "Mercy? Lady, I'm just old and out of shape." But they didn't care. They lifted him up, praising his humility ritual. They declared his flop the greatest display of restraint they had ever witnessed. By the end of the night, Jed lay back in his recliner, worn out from doing almost nothing. The widows danced around the fire, celebrating his supposed triumph. He shook his head, sipping whiskey straight from the bottle. Hell, I don't know how long I can keep this up. One day they're gonna figure out I'm just a tired old rancher, not some intergalactic stud horse. Yet deep down, as the firelight flickered and 11 alien women sang his praises, he felt something stir, not just the whiskey warming his gut, but a flicker of pride. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't invisible. For the first time, people actually believed he was worth something. Even if it was all one giant, hilarious mistake. Jed had gotten used to the chanting, the shrines, the endless steak and whiskey offerings. He'd gotten used to being called Stallion of Two Worlds, though he still insisted he was closer to wrinkled jackass of one. But nothing could prepare him for the day the alien High Council showed up, a caravan of silver ships landing like thunder across his pasture. Out came towering officials draped in robes, each carrying scrolls thicker than a bull's neck. Their leader, a massive insectoid matron with wings glittering like stained glass, announced through a translator, the husband must now prove himself by fulfilling the galactic quota. Jed squinted. Quota? What quota? The widows knelt in reverence. 11 sessions in one lunar cycle. It is the law. Jed nearly spit out his whiskey. 11? Lady, I can barely make it through one round of bingo without a nap. The officials scribbled notes, murmuring, the husband sets the bar high. His expectations are staggering. Jed groaned. No, my stamina is staggering. As in, I stagger when I walk. But the council wasn't laughing. They unrolled the official contract, glowing with alien runes. It listed duties, performance thresholds, and a terrifying section labeled extended breeding marathons. Jed stared, muttering, sounds less like a honeymoon and more like farm equipment maintenance. The widows, however, were already cheering, convinced he'd rise to the challenge. They hauled him up onto a platform, the entire ranch now resembling a galactic rodeo with glowing banners and alien trumpets blaring. Jed raised his hands, trying to calm them. Hold your horses, hell, hold your entire damn barn. I ain't about to keel over just to keep some alien law happy. The leader of the council tilted her head. Then how will you meet the quota? Jed rubbed his chin. He knew his body wasn't built for cosmic marathons, but he wasn't about to admit defeat. Years of ranching had taught him one thing: when you can't outmuscle the problem, you outthink it. And if there was one thing Jed knew better than anyone, it was how to run a ranch with limited resources. He straightened, voice steady. You want quotas? Fine. I'll give you quotas. But not the way you think. Back home, we got rules: never overgraze a pasture, always rotate crops, and spread fertilizer where it counts. You push too hard in one place, you ruin the land. You spread it smart, you get bounty for years. The council leaned in, intrigued. Jed jabbed a finger in the air. Same goes for this husband business. You don't need 11 sessions in one cycle. You need rotation. Rotation keeps things fresh, keeps the soil fertile. Spread the workload, and you'll never run dry. The widows gasped as if he'd cracked the secrets of the universe. The leader whispered, rotation, sustainable studding. Jed wasn't done. And another thing, crop rotation. You don't plant the same thing every season. You change it up, keep the land guessing. That's how you keep fertility alive. He sipped his whiskey, then added with a smirk, and let's not forget fertilizer. You can't expect good harvests without encouragement, without tending. Sometimes a little speech, sometimes a little nap. That's how you build lasting results. The council burst, their wings trembling. One declared, the husband speaks wisdom of ages. Sustainable husbandry. Balanced quotas. The widows were already nodding, scribbling every word into holy texts. Jed leaned back, letting the silence build, then growled, if you want this stallion to keep plowing, you better let him rest, rotate, and snack. Otherwise, you'll end up with dust fields and disappointment. The crowd erupted into thunderous cheer. Alien officials stamped approval. The widows wept with joy, chanting his name. The leader bowed. From this day forward, your methods shall be law. You are not merely husband. You are grand husband of the stars. Jed blinked, half drunk, half amused. Grand husband? Hell, I was barely a decent husband the first time around. Didn't matter. They carried him on their shoulders, parading him like a hero. The mule brayed, joining the celebration. Someone even strapped a sash across its chest reading Sacred Companion of Fertility. By nightfall, the ranch had turned into a festival. Alien torches lit the fields, music hummed through the air, and 11 widows danced around Jed's recliner like priestesses at a shrine. He sipped his whiskey, shaking his head. Damn fools turned my lazy habits into scripture. But deep down, he felt it, something he hadn't in years. Pride. Purpose. A spark. He wasn't just an old man waiting to die. He was the backbone of a new religion, a cosmic symbol of wisdom, humor, and sustainable stud management. He glanced at the widows laughing, at the council scribbling, at the mule chewing hay with a ribbon in its manner. For the first time, the weight of years felt lighter. Jed raised his glass. Well, I'll be damned. Thought I was finished. Turns out, I'm cosmic cattle. The widows cheered. The council declared another holiday. The mule farted loud enough to echo. Jed leaned back in his chair, grin spreading. Guess this old rancher's still got some plowing left in him.